Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Duraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we're going to get into the game previews from a start-sit perspective. So the first game we're going to get into here is the Saints versus the Falcons. So if you want to see the quarterback breakdown on these guys, go check out our quarterback preview. From the Saints perspective, it's Alvin Kamara. He's locked in as a top 5-7 option maybe. I have him currently running back 7 this week. And again, I've been pretty vocal. I have him in one of my leagues, so I'm trying not to go crazy about how high I'm ranking him or how high I'm stoked to have him, but I do have him at 7. Atlanta, you're starting Bijan pretty easy from the running back perspective in this game. Wide receivers for the Saints, you're obviously starting Olave. Shaheed last week was a big disappointment, right? He had 0 points, but we were just talking right before we started that Shaheed had a ball just it was a good pass defend, but it did hit his hands. And if he had come down with that touchdown, it's like a 40-yard touchdown, we wouldn't even be having this conversation about him having a disappointing week. So I would still consider him, especially in 3 wide receiver leagues, I would still consider him a start this week against the Falcons. On the Falcons side of the ball, there's Drake London. Go ahead and start him. I have him in my top 20. He's kind of an automatic start in 3 wide receiver leagues. Looking at Darnell Mooney, if he is still on your waiver wire, I would definitely go and acquire him. He has looked good so far. He's been getting a lot of targets. And I do think as a flex option that he can be somebody that you look to this week, especially if you're dealing with a lot of injuries, somebody who can give you volume and somebody who has the possibility to score here in what could turn into a high-scoring game. I think maybe it's, around 40 total points in this game, but I do think that there's a chance here that Mooney does get in the end zone for the first time this year. And with the volume he's been seeing, I think he's a reasonable flex. Going down to the tight ends, I wouldn't start anybody for the Saints. Obviously Taysom Hill could be back this week. So he's somebody that could become more of an option at tight end as we go, because tight end has been terrible. So it doesn't really matter if he gives you 3 or 4 points, because that's basically what everybody's been giving you. And he could have a potential to get back in on the running game. As a Kamara owner, I do hope he comes in and gets some more carries, because Kamara got 26 carries this last week. That's not something I want to see continue, really. If Taysom Hill was able to come in and take 8 of those carries, keep Kamara around 18 to 20 max, and then have Taysom kind of take on that role between 5, sometimes 10 touches like this game, when they're running the ball a lot. So consider him, and maybe we'll talk about him later in the week and beat the waiver wire. And on the Atlanta side, at tight end, Kyle Pitts, if you have him, he's likely your only tight end. Just go ahead and start him.
Moving over to the next game, we've got the Rams at the Bears. Kyren Williams, locked and loaded starter. He's our RB4 this week and RB3 on the season. He got 26 touches last week against the 49ers. He's kind of their only and best playmaker on this team while Puka and Kupp are out. He leads the NFL in carries inside the 20-yard line and also leads the NFL in carries inside the 10-yard line. On the Bears side, for running backs, don't start any of the Bears running backs. Their offensive line is a mess right now. Swift has looked awful. Last week, we saw him splitting carries with Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert. So I don't want any part of this backfield until they hopefully figure out how to run the ball successfully. On the wide receiver side, for the Rams, Demarcus Robinson, you're not starting him. He did run 94% of the routes, but only had 4 targets for 1 catch and 32 yards. Tutu Atwell, he had a nice game. He had a big play, ran 82% of the routes, but the Bears are a very good pass defense, so I'm not rolling Tutu Atwell in Chicago, and I'm not starting any of their other wide receivers. One thing to note, too, which is interesting, is the Rams the last couple of years have run 11 personnel at a higher rate than any other team. And last week, they ran 12 personnel at a rate of 44%, where the league average was like 19%. So we talked about Sean McVay, his ability to adjust, his ability to be creative. And I think, we saw that in play. So again, not starting any of these wide receivers for the Rams. On the Bears side, DJ Moore, starting DJ Moore. We have a wide receiver 20 this week, Rome Odunze. You're starting Odunze depending on format. We do have him as wide receiver 27 and could be a high upside play against this defense, especially if he continues to get targeted like he did last week. As far as Keenan Allen, continue to monitor his status. We're not 100% sure if he's going to be playing. I would like to leave him on my bench if I could. We don't know how many snaps he's going to be playing if he is active, so I would try to avoid that. On the tight end side, we've got Colby Parkinson for the Rams. He's our tight end 17 this week, so not starting him in any format unless, you've got say Evan Ingram misses the game or Njoku doesn't play, I can understand having to use Parkinson in a spot start, but not something that's inspiring. On the other side, Cole Kmet, he's our tight end 5 this week, coming off a great week 3 where he had 10 catches for 97 yards and a score. Again, if Keenan does play, that kind of caps Kmet's upside. But there's a good chance that you picked him up off the waiver wire this week and are intending to start him.
Non-Kmet, right? We have him ranked as though Keenan Allen's not going to play. And we saw kind of him take over the role. We saw him play an extremely expanded snap share over Gerald Everett. So that's why pushing him up here. Obviously, tight end's been terrible. I did rank him over George Kittle, for example, just because I'm not sure where Kittle's at in his injury progression here. So that's why we have Kmet pushed up pretty high. Next game, we have Minnesota versus Green Bay. I think this is going to be the best game of the morning slate. It's going to be division rivalry. Jordan Love possibly making his return. Minnesota going into Green Bay 3-0 with one of the best teams in the league. I'm very excited for this game, just in general. From the fantasy perspective, right? Minnesota running back Aaron Jones, you're starting him basically as long as he's healthy. I have him at running back 13. So I've seen him pushed up inside a lot of top 10s, but I'm not that enthusiastic yet. I do think guys like James Cook, James Conner, Derrick Henry, Jordan Mason, I'm not pushing him above any of those guys. I do think Jones has looked very good, and it's very encouraging. 2 or 3 games he's been as good as he has been, but I do also hope to see that Ty Chandler gets a little more involved, because it was like 25-7 in terms of opportunities. So I do think Ty Chandler in this game against Green Bay, who's beatable on the ground, hopefully gets a little bit bigger role in this game. But you're sitting Ty Chandler if you do have him. If you're an Aaron Jones owner, which I am, I would recommend trying to get Chandler onto your team. From Green Bay, you're starting Josh Jacobs. And again, similar to Ty Chandler, I would try and get Emmanuel Wilson on your roster if you can. And he's looked pretty good. He had a 30-yard touchdown reception. He actually kind of split snaps evenly with Jacobs last week, which I thought was interesting. But I do think when the game was close, it was all Jacobs. And then, once it was like a blowout and it was ended the game, that's when Wilson kind of took over. From the receivers, obviously starting Justin Jefferson. I hope Jordan Addison's back this week. And if Jordan Addison is back this week, I do think he's a reasonable flex. Naylor has been in that role, and he's been catching touchdowns. Darnold's been looking for him in the end zone quite a bit. And, obviously in the preseason, we were kind of down on Addison because we didn't know how this offense was going to look. No longer. If you have Addison, you're very, very happy about that. And I do think he's a reasonable flex this week. From Green Bay's perspective, if Jordan Love goes, that's obviously going to be a big boost for all of these receivers. I will say the only one I'd be starting this week is going to be Jaden Reed. And I do think against Minnesota, who's kind of stifled a lot of teams they've played so far. I mean, they just held the Houston Texans to only 7 points, only 1 score. CJ Stroud did not look good. They held Brock Purdy down the week before and kind of beat the 49ers, only held them to 17 points. So I do think this defense is good. I'm not starting Christian Watson. I'm not starting Dontavian Wicks. I'm not starting Romeo Doubs this week. I would only be looking to read from the wide receiver group. In Minnesota, you have Johnny Mund. We have him as like tight end 20. I wouldn't be looking there. Green Bay, Kraft still continues to play over Luke Musgrave. So I wouldn't be looking to play him. But if you're looking for a deep tight end, or you play in a tight end premium league and you're looking to add somebody onto the end of your roster, Kraft would be the guy that I'd be looking at there. No start there, though.
Next game up, Steelers at the Colts. From the running back side, Najee Harris. You're starting Najee Harris. He is our RB24 this week and has been averaging over 20 touches per game. Colts are one of the worst run defenses in the league, so do expect a heavy workload from Najee this week. Jalen Warren, not expecting him to play, so get him in your IR spot if you are a Warren owner and he misses the game. Cordero Patterson, can't trust Cordero. I mean, it seems like Arthur Smith does like him quite a bit, which is kind of what we had expected, of course, because it is Arthur Smith, but don't put him in your lineup. On the other side, Jonathan Taylor, locked and loaded, starter every week. This is a tough matchup against a good Steelers defense, but he's just too talented and gets too much volume to ever be sitting him. On the wide receiver front, George Pickens, he's our wide receiver 29 on the week. So starting depending on the format and your roster makeup, he has been disappointing so far this year as the wide receiver 49 in fantasy. But if you want to take a shot on his upside, given a matchup against a vulnerable defense, and if you have guys that are missing this week, go ahead and put George Pickens in. On the other side, Michael Pittman, I can't blame anyone for sitting Pittman at this point. He's the wide receiver 73 in fantasy right now. We still have him just inside the top 30 this week, which I don't feel good about at all. So I can't blame you if you want to see it from Pittman first. Josh Downs, we saw come back in the fold. He got 5 targets. Definitely not starting him anytime soon. Alec Pierce, you can't start him. There's a good chance he'll hit on a deep score, but there's a good chance that he puts up, a goose egg for you. And then A.D. Mitchell, you're not starting him. Tight ends, Pat Freiermuth. I don't think you can start Freiermuth. He's our tight end 17 this week, so unless you're in a deep, deep league and are desperate. He has been consistent, though, catching 4 passes per game, but all of those are lower yardage and not really going to rack up a lot of points. So if he does score a touchdown, that's his only way to hit like a 10-point week, and you're not starting any of the Colts tight ends.
Next game up is Denver versus New York. This is going to be a pretty simple game here, I think. You're not starting anybody again on Denver, right? You're sitting Bo Nix, you're sitting Javonte Williams, and you're sitting Cortland Sutton. The New York defense is just too good. Sauce Gardner up against Cortland Sutton is going to be a very difficult matchup for him to win in. We're not going to get a week like last week, I don't think. Like Denver's going on the road into New York too, so I think that's just additional disadvantage to sit all your Broncos. If you have anybody on the Jets, if you have Aaron Rodgers, obviously in Superflex, he's definitely an option for you here. We have him at quarterback 21, even though he did very well last week, and this is a beatable Denver defense, so I do think maybe we're a little bit too low on Aaron Rodgers. If you want to play him, I wouldn't blame you at all. If he's your second quarterback that you drafted, you're obviously starting him. Breece Hall, set and forget start. Braylon Allen, I do think can be a decent flex here. I mean, I do expect them to be winning, and I do think Braylon Allen has shown that he can handle 8 to 10 touches, so there could be a scoring opportunity here. And if this game does get out of hand in the fourth quarter and Breece Hall is kind of off the field a little bit more, we could see Braylon Allen get into that 12-touch range, which as a flex or as an RB2, right? Like if you're struggling with injuries at running back and you've had like Isaiah Pacheco go down, say, I don't think that Braylon Allen is the worst option here this week for New York against Denver. The tight ends for New York, if you added Conklin, I wouldn't blame you. He had a good game. They made a point to get him involved. He got a couple shots on the seam, very good yards per catch and yards per target in this game. So I don't necessarily think that you should be starting him, but I do have him as tight end 14. So, you could be in a situation where you have Mark Andrews and you picked up Conklin and you're like, dude, I'm done until I see Andrews on the field, and you can play Conklin. I wouldn't blame you for doing that at all. Tight end, again, we've been talking about, has been so bad. So Conklin is in start consideration here if you are looking for somebody that has a little bit of upside.
Next game, we've got the Eagles at the Buccaneers. Obviously, from the running back side, you are starting Saquon Barkley, locked and loaded. Has looked as good as he has since maybe his Penn State days, or at least early Giants days, which is great to see, running behind a real offensive line. On the other side, Rachaad White, he's our RB27 this week. He had only 11 touches last week, but he did out-snap Bucky Irving 28-14. Coach Bowles said the reason he dominated snaps was that White is better in pass protection. He's also taken 100% of their snaps in the red zone, so I think there's still a little bit of a sliver of optimism for White owners, but I think long-term Bucky will continue to cut into his playing time. As far as Bucky goes, I'm still sitting him this week. I want to see it more play out on the field, but he should be rostered in all formats. He is someone that I've tried to make a couple kind of lower end trades for in some leagues with no success because people are kind of buying into the hype and their coach says he wants to get him more involved. On the wide receiver front, it sounds like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are going to miss this game, which is very unfortunate, especially if you own those guys, but just from a real football perspective. And I'm not trusting Jahan Dotson, even if he's the number one wide receiver on this team. On the other side, Mike Evans, he's our wide receiver 13 this week. He's had a couple back-to-back disappointing performances, but he's too talented to leave on your bench. Chris Godwin, he's a must start. He's our wide receiver 10 this week, and he is wide receiver 3 on the season. From the tight end side, Dallas Goedert, obvious must start. He's our tight end 2 this week. Assuming both of those receivers are out, look for a heavy dose of Goddard in this game. And then you're not starting K-Dot.
Going down to the next game, we got the Bengals and Carolina. 1 week ago, we would have said this is not going to be a good game from fantasy perspective. But now, fast forward with Dalton, I do have a lot of hope for this game actually being a high-scoring game. Both of these defenses can't stop anybody. And I do think that, Joe Burrow, top 10 Quarterback, we got Dalton ranked at 11. And then so like obviously get both those guys into your lineup if you have them in Superflex. From the running back perspective, in Cincinnati, Zach Moss has been dominating the snaps and looked great. He scored on that late touchdown, kind of a garbage time play there, honestly. But he did get a lot of receiving game work. So if you do have Zach Moss going up against Carolina, this is a beatable defense. He just beat Washington. I do think you should be playing Zach Moss this week. I have him ranked as running back 26 right now, but if you request the rankings in the comments, you'll see that updated. I definitely have to get him higher. I think I'm going to push him up over Tony Pollard into that running back 19 this week, up in that Pollard, Brian Robinson, Chuba Hubbard group. I do think he's set up to be really good. And after reflecting a little bit more on that game he just had, I do think he's got much more upside than where I have him currently ranked. On Carolina's side, I just mentioned Chuba Hubbard, have him at 21, probably going to move him down to 22 because I'm going to move Moss over him. But you're definitely considering him as a start and at the very worst, a flex option for you in your leagues this week. Wide receivers, you're starting Chase, flex, T. Higgins. He didn't do much in his first game back, but I do think it's encouraging to see him out there. And this could be an additionally get right game in something that we think could be high scoring. He just missed on a touchdown last week too. So, I do think they maybe make an effort to get him a little bit more involved now that Chase kind of got his squeaky wheel established game here. And on Carolina's side, you're starting Deontay Johnson for sure. I have him as wide receiver 16. I have him actually over Garrett Wilson. So, you got to make sure you get him into your lineups this week. From the tight end perspective, if you picked up Mike Gesicki, again, similar kind of like to Tyler Conklin or Hunter Henry, you're dealing with an injury at tight end, or you just are sick of all the options that you've had. He could be a streamer this week against Carolina in what should be a pretty high-scoring game. I also thought with T. Higgins out that he was going to completely go away, but he did have 4 for 47 last week as well with Higgins on the field. So there might be a role here in high-volume passing game, especially with how bad their defense is, where Burrow could be just looking to throw a lot and he could stay decently involved in the game plan. You're not starting any tight ends from Carolina.
Next game, we've got Jaguars at the Texans for the running backs. We've got Travis Etienne. You're starting Etienne. He's our RB17 this week. He's RB22 on the season, which is probably not what you signed up for where you drafted him, but he's been a solid floor play. He hasn't scored below 10 half PPR points in any game. Texans are a very tough run defense, so kind of temper expectations with Etienne, especially given how bad this Jaguars team has looked. Joe Mixon, he's still not practicing, so not expecting him to play. I can't trust Cam Akers, especially if Pierce doesn't return this week. I understand if you're desperate. There's been a lot of injuries, so kind of just know your roster in that regard. From the wide receiver front, Brian Thomas Jr., we've got him at wide receiver 32 this week, so a good flex option. It was really encouraging to see him get 9 targets last week. So with his playmaking ability, assuming that target share continues to push toward that 9-10, we could be in for some pretty big weeks from him ahead. Christian Kirk, sitting Kirk, we've got him wide receiver 44. It was encouraging to see him get 8 catches for 79 yards last week, but I'm not ready to trust him in starting lineups. On the other side, Nico Collins, you're always starting Nico. He's our wide receiver 5 this week because we don't expect Tank Dell to play. So locked and loaded. Stephon Diggs, again, if Dell is out, Diggs and Nico to the moon here, and just hope that they don't pull Stroud because they're up by 25 points. On the tight end front, Evan Ingram, monitor his status, but probably playing him if he is good to go. Don't expect him to play this week, but just keep an eye on that. Dalton Schultz, he hasn't really done much of anything, but with Tank Dell out, maybe he's a solid option. But maybe they just stick with 3 wide receiver sets and bring up John Mechie.
Game we got Washington and Arizona. I'm very excited for this game from a fantasy perspective. I don't know that I would have said that again a couple weeks ago, but Washington, obviously, Jaden Daniels had a breakout game, and that was good for Terry McLaurin. So I would consider Terry McLaurin a flex here. I do have him ranked at wide receiver 36 just because a lot of his production was on deep balls. And so connecting on that can be hit or miss. So I am a little bit hesitant still with him, but if his volume goes up, I do think he can work his way all the way into the top 20 because Daniels has looked good. From the running back on Washington, Brian Robinson, you're starting him. He's top 20. I do think he's looked very good despite having kind of a down week last week. He still got in the end zone. So I do think here as well with Eckler out that he could take a bigger role in the passing game this week. So I think he does have very high upside, top 10 upside this week for Brian Robinson. In Zach Ertz, if you're stuck at tight end, he had 5 for 40 last week. He looked pretty good. So if you need somebody, especially in PPR, I do think that Ertz could be getting some of those closer to the line of scrimmage receptions this week. On Arizona's end, you're starting James Conner. He going up against Washington. That's hard to beat that matchup, really. As a running back, I have him at 10 this week, so make sure he's locked and loaded into your lineups. Marvin Harrison Jr., I do think, could have a massive week. This is as high as I've ranked him at any point during the year so far. I have him at 6, one spot ahead of Nico. And so I do think against Washington that this could just be a monster game for him. We just saw Chase have a monster game against their secondary. And anytime he's one-on-one, I think Kyler's going to be looking his way. Michael Wilson, too, if you're stuck or if you're looking for a end of bench waiver wire ad, I think what you could do worse than Wilson. He had 8 targets last week. He actually got some catches closer to the line of scrimmage, too. He's been a down the field guy, but he could, in a game that they should be passing a lot, that should be high scoring, he could be involved here. I do think he's a sit, but more of just like a speculative bench ad. And McBride, if he goes, he's tight end.
Next up, we got Patriots at the 49ers. So this game might be a little bit ugly. Niners are like a 10-point favorite at home. On the running back side, Ramondre Stevenson coming off a brutal week against the Jets where he didn't even score 1 fantasy point in half PPR. We've got him at RB23 this week, but given what should be an awful game script, he's kind of hard to trust. So don't just assume that you need to plug him into your lineups if you've got other options like guys we talked about, like a Zach Moss or a Chuba Hubbard that have much better matchups this week might be someone you want to look to start over someone like Ramondre. Jordan Mason on the other side, you're starting Jordan Mason. We've got him RB8. If this is a very positive game script, expect them to just kind of close the door with Mason. On the wide receiver side, you're starting Brandon Ayuk. He is our wide receiver 23 this week. He's going to have Christian Gonzalez shadowing him, which should be pretty tough for him. And then Juwan Jennings, if you got him off waivers this week or the week prior, this is why you did so, right? Well, Debo is still out, so I have no issues riding the hot hand here with Jennings. And tight ends, we saw Hunter Henry come back to earth a little bit last week. He kind of had that similar week 1 as he did week 3 with that spike week in week 2. But given the state of the position, if you're desperate, I understand needing to play him. Kittle, if he's in, you're playing him.
Next game we got here is Cleveland versus the Raiders. So on Cleveland's side, Jerome Ford missed practice on Wednesday, but practiced today in full. So hopefully he's all ready to go. He split a lot more with Foreman than we thought he was going to in week 2, but then it was right back to just all Ford. He only missed like 10 snaps or something like that. So against the Raiders defense, I do think that he is a flex consideration. If you're, again, one of those guys that if you're dealing with injuries at the running back position, you can put into your RB2 spot here. And I think against the Raiders, a very gettable defense. So hopefully he can get it going on the ground this week. For wide receivers for Cleveland, obviously got Amari Cooper, start him. Judy, I think, is still a bench receiver, and Elijah Moore I'm not really touching. But Judy, interesting usage so far. So I do think as the season goes on, maybe he can grow into a starting role, especially in 3 wide receivers with a flex, especially if Jameis Winston takes over, because Watson just unfortunately doesn't look that good. But if it is Winston, I do think that there's a lot more upside for high volume passing. On the Raiders side, you're not starting any of the running backs. I honestly think Zamir White is getting very, very dangerously close to a drop. And I think of the 2, I'd rather just have Alexander Madison at this point. He's playing a lot more of the high value touches on, the passing game work he's getting, the goal line work. I'm not entirely sure he's like locked into 100% of the goal line work because they did have like a hurry up offense issue where there was like a potentially reviewable play and Madison was on the field and they gave it to him quick and he scored. So I'm not entirely sure this is not Zamir's goal line role, but I do think I'd rather have Madison than Zamir White at this point. And at the wide receiver position, you got Devontae Adams, you're starting him. Jacoby Myers, we had a Jacoby Myers sighting last week. He did very good, 7 for 61 and a touchdown on 9 targets. So I do think he's worth an ad. If somebody did drop him, I know I dropped him in a league and you ended up adding him in our league. So I do think he's reasonable there. At tight end, I don't think Njoku goes, so you're obviously not playing anybody on Cleveland's side. And for the Raiders, from the tight end, obviously Brock Bowers locked into the top 2 or 3 position here. I know you have Goddard ranked ahead of him. McBride dealing with a concussion, so he might not go, but Bowers top 3 tight end, top 4 tight end, depending on where you like Ferguson this week as well. But he's a locked and loaded starter, no doubt.
Next up, we got the Chiefs at the Chargers. So from the running back side, Carson Steele, we have him as the RB30 this week. If you are someone that picked up Carson Steele, it's probably because you were hurting at running back. So I think this is a fine play if you're kind of stuck at the position, especially in a game where they should control the time of possession. I'm not starting P. Ryan or Kareem Hunt. I want to see this play out a little bit more. On the other side, J.K. Dobbins, we've got him at RB22 this week, so just outside of a must-start in 10-team leagues. I think he'll be getting a lot of volume like we've seen, so it's kind of hard to leave him on your bench, but a lot of this kind of depends on whether or not Justin Herbert is good to go. If Herbert goes, the offense should be a little bit more efficient, or a lot more efficient, obviously. If he's not, Dobbins' volume would go up, but I think he's just going to be running into a wall for the Chiefs. On the wide receiver front, Rashee Rice locked and loaded each and every week. Xavier Worthy, kind of a boom bust depending on your risk appetite and what you need from your team. If you're projected to lose by like 25 points and it's either Xavier Worthy or someone who's probably going to get you 8 points, I have no issues putting him into your lineup. Don't start any of the Chargers wide receivers, especially if Herbert is out. I still am not ready, or probably won't ever be ready, to trust Quentin Johnston. 2 of his 3 touchdowns were on broken plays. He only had 2 targets last week. Again, I think Ladd is going to be the clear-cut number 1 by the time we're at the end of the year. Just not completely ready to trust him in my lineups. On the tight end side, Travis Kelce, we've got him as tight end 8 this week, so I must start. Even though he's been a disappointment, maybe we'll see him get the ball a little bit more. But given the state of the position, you're starting Kelce, and especially where you drafted him. Chargers, you're not starting any of their tight ends.
Next game we're looking at here is Buffalo versus Baltimore. James Cook, locked and loaded starter. Nobody else here. Ray Davis, I know, scored, but it was in garbage time last week. This is not going to happen in this game. I wouldn't anticipate. I think this is going to be another one, game of the week. I'm so happy this is on Sunday Night Football, so we just get to sit and watch this entire game. I'm very excited for it. On Baltimore side, locked and loaded, Derrick Henry, nobody else. At the wide receiver position, I do think it was excellent to see Khalil Shakir step into that number 1 wide receiver role. He's been kind of the most consistent and finally had this breakout game. So I do think right now, Keon Coleman over the second half of the year maybe gets to be a little bit more of the dominant wide receiver, but he was also like on the bench randomly during certain drives last week. I don't know exactly what was going on with that.
He missed the first quarter because he was like late to practice or something.
Yeah, so they're again, like weird situation going on there. And so I do think Shakir, until further notice, is going to be a start here. And I do really like the fact that he kind of was able to step up. He caught most of his targets. I need to look, but I know he had like 6 for 85 and a touchdown. Excellent game from him. I do expect them to lean on him here against a beatable Baltimore secondary. I wouldn't start any of the other receivers for Buffalo. And for Baltimore, it's Zay Flowers and nobody else. I know Bateman scored last week, but hopefully you don't even have him on your roster. And both, I guess I should say all 3 of the tight ends in this game, I have ranked kind of back to back. I would start Kincaid. Of all of these guys, I have him at 10. Mark Andrews is just so scary to start, but if you drafted him, you likely don't have a different one. So I know where I have him. I'm just going back to him and hoping for a different result in a game that should include a lot of passing. And likely, again, if you added him and you want to play him over one of your starters that just hasn't been performing, I don't have a problem with that either. So I think all 3 of these guys, especially Kincaid and Andrews, should be started and likely as a possible start here, depending on your situation.
Trevor had to drop. He is on baby feeding duty. So the next game we've got for the Monday night window is the Titans at the Dolphins. Miami's a 1-point road favorite with the lowest over-under of the week of 36.5 points. So this might be kind of an ugly, boring game. On the running back side, Tony Pollard, you're starting Tony Pollard. We have him at RB19 this week. He only got 11 touches last week, but that was because they were trailing by so much. So don't expect that to happen in a more neutral matchup. Tajay Spears, you're not starting Tajay Spears. On the other side, Devontae Chan, always a must start. We have him RB6 this week. Don't start Mostert, even if he goes, please, and definitely don't start Jeff Wilson. Tyreek Hill, we've got him at wide receiver 14 this week, which is kind of sad to see him drop down the rankings this much, but this all has to do with quarterback play. We're still not 100% sure who's going to be the starting quarterback this week. It could be Tyler Huntley, or they could go back to the guy they had last week. Waddle, we've got a wide receiver 39. I just can't trust starting him. We know he can break a big play, but there's a good chance he completely busts. On the other side, Calvin Ridley, we've got him at wide receiver 30 this week. So a must start in 3 wide receiver leagues. Didn't do anything last week, but he was up against Jair Alexander in a tough Green Bay secondary. DeAndre Hopkins, big week last week. If you want to chase that, go ahead. But I think there's a good chance that Ridley reassumes himself as the number one option on this team. As far as the tight ends go, you're not starting any of the tight ends in this game. The last of the Monday night games, we've got the Seahawks at the Lions. So this should be a great game. Very excited for this one. On the running back side, got to monitor the status of Kenneth Walker, especially since he's going on a Monday night. I know I'm kind of in a position in our home league where I've got Kenneth Walker on the bench, and I right now have Zach Moss in my flex spot just because he goes on Sunday, and if there's uncertainty about Walker's status, you don't want to be shut out. So keep a close eye on that if you are a Walker or if you are a Charbonnet owner. On the Lions side, you're starting Gibbs, you're starting Monty. Gibbs has been a little bit of a disappointment based on where you drafted him, and Monty has overperformed, which of course he does, but I think both of those guys you can start with confidence. On the wide receiver side, you're obviously starting DK Metcalf. JSN has looked really good, so I think I would continue to push him into lineups. Can't trust Tyler Lockett. On the Lions side, of course, you're starting St. Brown. Jameson Williams, he's been great. I know he had a slow last week, but he's been getting a much higher volume than we've seen in the past, so I think he's definitely locked and loaded as a starter. For the tight ends, don't start Noah Fant, and monitor Laporta's status. I believe he is going to play. He has been a huge disappointment this year so far, but it's not like you probably have any better options. So what could turn into a high-scoring affair, I would definitely have Laporta in your lineups. And with that, that is our start sit for week 4. Best of luck with your teams this weekend. Thanks.